I'll come now to the last part of the course. Even if you have not completed everything, we would have covered substantial ground for you to be able to understand what are really all the various innovations and issues. I need to cover patent litigation, which I think is important. You know that iodine is one of the very important micronutrients which our body requires. There are people who have thyroid related problems. I think all of you would probably be consuming iodized salt. Iodine is best delivered through the vehicle of salt. Uh, the reason for that is that there's only a limited amount of salt that all of us consume. Typically, it would be anywhere between 8 to 10 grams in a day. That's what everybody consumes. So, if you have put in a certain amount of iodine, you cannot over consume iodine, and neither will you under consume. Everybody takes about that much of salt. That's the requirement, and that's why iodized salt have become so popular. In fact, you virtually don't get non-iodized salt today. Every salt in the market is iodized. But there were certain important issues. One of them is that iodine in the salt is not very stable. So there are certain issues around stability. The second issue is that the iodized salt, what we consume, is all made from potassium iodate. Manufacturing potassium iodate, I mean, of course, it can be done, but it's normally done by some companies, okay, and then they provide the material to other companies, and then they do the iodization in their big plants, and then it gets distributed all over the country. A lot is also exported, and that's really how the entire business takes place. We were interested in two things. One is that is there an easy way to prepare iodized salt? That was one. And also in a decentralized manner. That is, not that somebody like Tata Chemicals only can produce it and is selling it all over the country, because they charge a substantial amount of money for iodized salt, and so that increases the cost of the product. So we wanted to see if you can take, like, let's say, uniodized salt, which is not very costly, and whether locally people can do iodization. That was one issue. And the second was, I mentioned to you about this lack of adequate stability of the iodizing agent, potassium iodate. And so we wanted to see, is there any way of trying to solve this problem? Why were we doing all this? Because the institute where I was the director, its name is Salt and Marine Chemicals. So we were the ones who were supposed to do all this, and those are the kinds of technologies that were introduced by our institute the years. Many different technologies. What I will show you is an example of how we shifted knowledge from a completely different application area to the area of iodized salt. Now, I had shown this slide when we were discussing about intermediary products, when we were talking about the TRIZ methodology. What did we say? That most people use bromine, Br2, for doing all their bromination reaction, and bromine is a very hazardous chemical. In trying to overcome that, we were able to show that you can take a mixture of bromide and bromate, and that can do the job of bromination. The reason why it was shown under intermediary is that this kind of thing is obtained during the production of bromine as an intermediate by one of the methods, which is known as alkali absorption method, where bromine that is liberated from C bittern is trapped in alkali, and it will convert into the 5 Br and 1 BrO3 minus. That's the standard disproportionation of bromine in alkali, which all of you know. And then it was further oxidized to this particular composition, and then it became very good for doing atom efficient bromination with almost quantitative utilization of the Br. That's the context in which we discussed this. The knowledge that we transferred was thinking that can you, for example, if I'm working with bromide bromate, instead of that, can one work with iodide iodate? And the reason for thinking along those lines is that people could just add iodine into a solution of alkali. You'll get iodide iodate, which is a, soluble compound, and then use the mixed compound as a iodizing agent. There are certain risks. The risk is that if you're not careful and if you don't control the pH, then you could again recombine the iodide and iodate, and it will form iodine, and which then will not serve the purpose. So obviously there were certain constraints, but just to tell you that it was a very novel idea which nobody had worked on before, and in a matter of no time we were granted our patents on this easy way of making an iodizing agent. Take iodine, put it into alkali, make iodide iodate, spray it on salt. That was the idea. And effectively, what we had done was we moved knowledge across boundaries from work on bromine to work on iodine, but in a completely different application segment. In fact, those were the days when this also created a lot of interest. And in fact, we'd done some work with BRC, for example, where comparisons were made between, let's say, potassium iodide as an iodizing agent, potassium iodate as an iodizing agent, and the mixture of iodide and iodate, which is what we had formulated. And because BRC had excellent facilities to make radioactively labeled compounds, so they said, yeah, we can help you with this. And so they made iodine 131, which is radioactive. And in fact, they studied that how these three different iodizing agents, iodate, iodide, and the mixture of iodide and iodate, how they actually are taken up in the body. So the three things that they studied was the thyroid gland in the blood and in excretion. That was a very interesting study, and it basically also showed that this iodide iodate combination that we had made was a very good formulation. It had good bioavailability, just like having iodide and iodate. The general concept was great, but a fundamental assumption which we made actually turned out to be not necessarily right. And that assumption was that iodide and iodate will react in the stomach to form I2 again. The reason why it was flawed is that the amount of iodine that we take, as I told you, is so small. And in the stomach, there is a further dilution factor. You're drinking water. So it's an extremely low concentration of iodide and iodate. And the kinetics, the rate constants are fine, but the concentration effects are such that the actual rate of the reaction will be very slow, simply because the probability of finding an iodide and iodate in the same vicinity are very low. So it may be that even though you expect that it will form iodine, it may not. And I think that the BRC results tended to tell us that it may not have formed I2 as such, and it may have actually got absorbed in the body more as iodide and iodate. But what I'm trying to tell you is that when you go deep into the entire thing, you could find that there are many unknowns. Even though the basic chemistry of doing a preparing iodide and iodate is very simple, but the rest of everything might be very, very complicated. How it absorbs in the body, what happens in the stomach, what happens to stability, etc., etc. Is it clear to everyone? Did you understand? All clear?
Yes, sir.
Yes, sir.
Okay. Now this was like a side sprout. That was not really the thing that we were after. It was an innovation coming from shifting of knowledge from bromine to iodine. What was the real thing that we were after? The real thing was to make a stable iodizing agent. And the reason for that were, let me tell you what it was. I received a letter from the Indian Salt Commission. What he told me is that in India, we do not make a gram of iodine. All the iodine is imported. We don't have a source of iodine. And he asked me whether we can explore indigenous sources of iodine. And it was an earnest plea from the Salt Commissioner. Now, I knew that iodine can be present in oil wells. So I talked to ONGC. I found that they did not have really any data. We also knew that there is iodine in many of our seaweeds, and because we were working in seaweeds, so we looked at it. But then it was very clear that the volumes that we are talking about are so large. We are talking about iodizing something like 15 million tons of salt, that kind of iodine and seaweed, etc., is simply not available. And so it looks like a great idea, but then it would not be practical. So we really could not identify a source of iodine. Although, let me tell you, in many of these cases, as for example in lithium ion battery, or you'll find in other cases, this kind of situation where you may not have a resource, but because we are importing these mobile phones and things like that, which come with the battery, and when the battery goes dead, you can recover the lithium. And so India could actually become a resource for lithium, simply because you're recovering it from the product. So waste can be a resource. That's of course one. But in this particular case, what it seemed to me is that what we should first focus on is minimizing wastage of iodine. When I was having a word with the managing director of Tata Chemicals in those days, I came to know from him that usually these people add almost twice the amount of iodizing agent than what is required by the law. And I asked him, why do you do that? He said, yeah, because the iodine is not very stable, and it can decompose. And if we are caught selling iodized salt with less iodine than what is statutory, then we can be put behind bars. So we don't want to take the risk. So what we do is that we add about double the amount of iodizing agent, and that way we are pretty certain that not more than 50% is lost in manufacture as well as on storage. To me, it had always seemed that it's a bit stupid to do that, and that is really what motivated us to try and make the iodizing agent more stable. So that's really what we did. There was also another reason for doing it. You see, what happens is that some of the impurities in salt tend to catalyze the decomposition of iodine. But those same impurities are also good as micronutrients. So it's not actually such a good idea to make the salt completely free of all these impurities. That was something that we wanted to avoid. So we were actually interested in whether one can make an iodizing agent which can be stable even in the presence of these impurities. That was the broad idea. Now, what happened then was that my colleagues in Bhavnagar had already done quite a bit of work on this particular material, which is known as hydrotalcite. You may have heard of it. It's basically like magnesium hydroxide, except that some of the magnesium is replaced with aluminium. So it creates an excess positive charge in the lattice, and therefore you have exchangeable ions. So they had made these compounds, and it was patented in 2006. And then the first production of synthetic hydrotalcite was introduced in our country. It started with this company called Huba. This is in fact Mr. Huba himself. He flew down from Germany to inaugurate the plant. And so hydrotalcite had been made. It's another story how we got into this work with Huba. I don't want to get into it at this point, but it actually originated from a desire to manage some effluent streams which they were generating in their factory. And the idea, I thought that maybe synthetic hydrotalcite can be made, and that's how this product got made. But then, because it has got anion exchange capacity and iodate, potassium iodate is basically an anion. And so the thought that came to us is that why don't we incorporate iodate inside the matrix of synthetic hydrotalcite, taking advantage of its anion exchange capability. But we didn't quite know how to do that. But we were very fortunate that there was a paper which had been published way back in 1996, almost, I will say, 7, 8 years before we started this work. And my colleagues, who were very good at accessing literature, they dug out this paper. And what this person, Linda Parker, had done was that she devised a means. This hydrotalcite comes with a carbonate, and so what she did was that she heated up this material, and the carbonate decomposed to release carbon dioxide, and then you are left with oxide, and that oxide could be exchanged with iodate. And she had not studied iodate; she had studied wide variety of other anions. But this was a wonderful procedure which she had developed. So my colleague said, why don't we try this particular procedure and let us see if we can incorporate iodate into hydrotalcite. The idea was that if we can sequester the iodate within the matrix of hydrotalcite, then it won't see the impurities in salt, and therefore it might remain more stable. That was basically the broad hypothesis that we had. In fact, this is the procedure. You calcine, it releases the CO2, and then in fact you can contact it with a solution of iodate, and the iodate gets in. And I'll tell you also what goes out. And so we made this. We found that when we incorporate about 5 to 6% of the iodine in this manner, that it's a very stable iodizing agent. So we were very happy with this work. And by the way, this is just something to show you that when you have an idea, and that idea is in a very nascent stage, at that time you have not even started any work, but you just have an idea. It's not a bad idea that suppose 3 or 4 of you, let's say, had a discussion and you came up with an idea. We created this form where immediately, while it is still an idea, we used to write down the names of all the people and what kind of role they have played or are planning to play. In this particular case, of course, the role was quite well defined, that who will do what. I mean, not surprisingly, it was a good piece of work, and we were granted our patent, and it was filed in 2004. You can see it was granted in 2010 because of some poor communication somewhere, and some things that got stuck somewhere. But anyway, I mean, what is important is this filing date, 2004. Because the Salt Commissioner had told us about the concern, so when we had succeeded in making this iodate incorporated in synthetic hydrotalcite, we sent it to the Salt Commissioner, and then he actually sent it to 3 of their field testing sites in Tuticorin, Bhubaneswar, and Jaipur. And then they did a monitoring of the salt for, I think, around 3 to 6 months. And they wrote back to us. And what I could gather from their letter was that our iodizing agent had worked as per our expectation, and it was very stable. So we were very happy. And a lot of people had come to know about this work, and people were approaching us for licensing the technology. So, we were in that kind of a mood of euphoria where we thought that, well, that's wonderful. It's not easy to make a new iodizing agent. And so we were very happy with ourselves. But then came a bombshell. What happened was, we used to have a very good relationship with Unilever. In those days, it was called Hindustan Lever. Later on, they changed their name to Unilever. Many projects we have done together. I mean, we were all on very good terms, and but we didn't know that Unilever had done something very similar. And what happened was that you saw 2004 patent got filed. And normally what happens is that after 18 months, the patent, even if it is not granted, even the patent application will get put in the website. So anyone can see the patent application. So as soon as it was on the website, Unilever had seen it. The head of their R&D, Dr. Vijay Kumar, called me up and he said, "Sir, we just came to see that you have filed for a, patent application on this stable iodizing agent, and we have done exactly that same work, and we have done it long before you." And he talked to me very politely, and he said, "Would you mind withdrawing your patent, okay, application?" He also told me that we know that you would not have seen this our patent application because it was still not published in the Indian Gazette, in the patent Gazette. And he also told me that they had filed an application in South Africa, which was granted. And I asked him, why South Africa? We have filed our application in US and Europe and all. He said, no, that's, we do that because South Africa, actually, you can register your patent, but they keep it secret. They don't actually reveal it. So what I understood from Unilever is that they had a cloak and dagger kind of a policy that they took a patent, but they didn't want anyone to know about the patent. Okay, I mean, and so it was basically the dagger was hidden under the cloak. But if there was any infringement, then they would pull out the dagger from under the cloak, okay, and stab you. And that's exactly what was happening to us. We were not aware, but that doesn't protect us actually. Not being aware is no reason for an infringement. People will say it's your problem that you're not aware. So after I did this, then I said that if you don't mind, please send us your patent and then let us have a look at it before taking a decision. And so they wrote a letter and they gave all the details of their patent application and the South African patent, etc. And then I asked the person who is to look after our IPR, Dr. D.B. Shukla, and Mr. Gandhi, who was a brilliant chemical engineer. Gandhi has really helped to commercialize many of the things that we came up with, many of the ideas. He was very prolific, really very brilliant person. And so, I sent it to them, this patent and all. And then they, both of them, came back to me and basically said, I think we should just withdraw. They said, I don't think we have a case. It's of course true that we were not aware of the work of Hindustan Lever, but let us withdraw. I was, of course, a bit sad because we also thought we came up with a good idea. That we had to withdraw made me feel very sad. So I said that, okay, I've heard you, but let me go through the patent myself, So I read the patent carefully, just trying to see if there is any room, for us to squeeze out of this potential infringement. That was really what I had thought. Like Ziegler did, he told you first the result and then how he went about getting it. Let me tell you that we went through this very difficult journey, which began around 2000 and I think 6 or 7. Okay, and finally in 2015 we won this case. In fact, it was a very important milestone. This particular case which we won, and in fact Pallava Bagla, who was the NDTV correspondent, did a very nice article at the time. He called it the modern day Satyagraha. And he said how a lab like ours took on a giant like MNC giant, and how we kind of won the case. Now, what was especially very significant about this particular case, and the person who was the Director General of CSIR at the time, he summarized it quite well. I'd already retired by then. So when this judgment was delivered, I was not in the institute, although I'd done all the work prior to that. And what was important was, you see, in those days, India was already quite famous for some very important patent battles which it had fought. And in fact, my previous boss, Dr. Mashelkar, our chancellor, he was the one who actually fought some very important battles. Okay, two of them which became extremely famous the world over. One was on Haldi. Haldi has been known in Indian literature, in our texts and things like that, as not only as a good spice but also as a healing agent. That was quite well known. And the second was basmati, because everybody had equated basmati rice with India, and of course Pakistan also. So basmati was equated with these countries, but there was a patent which was taken on somebody growing basmati in Texas, I think, and so that case had to be fought. And those were two important battles that India had won. But all those battles were really based on making the argument that we had traditional knowledge. So these are already known in our even in our religious texts and things like that, and so there is no case for filing the patent. But as Garg said, that while the CSIR has of late won a few patent battles against foreign entities, but those have mostly been fought on the grounds that foreigners had pirated know-how from India's traditional knowledge system. This patent, the one that on the iodized salt battle, was unique and a game changer, and Garg says it was fought and won based on modern scientific principles and not prior. So it was very significant because the battle actually had to be won on a very technical ground. Otherwise, there was no way that we would have been able to defeat Unilever on this. And so what I will tell you now was that how exactly we went about trying to do this. At some point, it looked like a losing battle. Okay? And as you saw, my colleagues had really advised me not to get into this. But I was somehow very adamant. I don't know what would have happened if he had lost. Maybe the consequences could have been quite harsh. So what happened was that when I started reading the Hindustan Lever patent, firstly, there was no doubt that they had conceived the idea long before us. So there's absolutely no merit. That we invented independently without knowing about their work is, of course, true to that extent. We also did something quite nice, but certainly they had done it much ahead of us. That there was no doubt about. I think one of the big mistakes that we made initially was that we wasted a lot of time in the initial stages trying to prove that we had not seen the patent, when in fact it was a futile exercise, because whether you have seen it or not, they had the priority date. So it was actually an unwise thing for us to do. But these are things that you now reflect on, and one can say these things with hindsight. But what were really the issues that I realized we will have to work on if we have to show any merit of our invention opposite what they had patented? First was, why in the first place did they patent and did we patent? We did because both probably thought that they have made a more stable iodizing agent. They recognized, just as we did, because they used to make Annapurna salt. So Unilever had a vested interest, in trying to improve the quality of the iodizing agent. So they were also doing it for stability, and we as an institute with the name Central Salt and Marine Chemicals Research Institute, that's our job, to make our products better. So both of us were really working towards similar objectives. But when I looked at the Hindustan Lever patent, it seemed to me to be a very poorly written patent. So I felt that there are opportunities around this particular patent. Maybe you can think of Takeda. Takeda's patent was much superior. Takeda had written everything there was, but still they could not. They They had a problem with DuPont. But this was, by comparison, a relatively poorly written patent. So what happened was that when I was looking at their patent, I found that they had not cited a single prior art. There was not one, anything. They obviously had the patent examiner believe that everything was independently done by them. So I had to look at, whether they created a false impression. That was important. We had to look at in their patent, they had only given one example of how exactly they practiced the invention, how exactly they went about making their iodizing agent. And they had also looked at the stability, they had published the data on stability of the iodizing agent. So we said we can always compare the iodizing agent that we have produced and the one that they have produced, and are they comparable? If it was comparable, then obviously we would have had no chance. Third was, you see, the iodate had to be taken up from a solution. I showed you that you calcine the hydrocalcite and then you contact it with a solution of potassium iodate, and the iodate gets taken up. Now, what was not clear is what was the percentage of the iodate which was being taken up by this hydrocalcite. And it was important at that point because it was not clear to us, certainly, and I don't think it was clear to them either. They didn't mention it anywhere in their patent. It was not clear how exactly the rest of the solution will be managed after we take up the iodate. Can you just top it up with some more iodate and repeat the thing? Or are there some complexities around it? So that was not something that they had touched or we had actually at that point thought of, but we began thinking about that as we went along. The fourth was this iodizing agent is a solid matrix. So it is not an iodizing agent which you dissolve in water and you spray on the salt. This is an iodizing agent which is a solid. Synthetic hydrocalcite is a solid. So you have to mix it in with the salt. So because it's a solid, we thought that we can always look at a comparison of the powdered X-ray diffraction patterns of their product and our product, and see how they stack up, whether there is a similarity or difference or whatever. And the fifth was, which is also important because it is a solid. There's always a fear that if it doesn't mix uniformly with the salt, you can have some portions of salt which have got more iodine and some portions of the salt which have got less iodine. Now, if you incorporate too much iodine into your iodizing agent, then obviously the amount of that substance that you'll have to add into salt will be less. And the less it becomes, the amount, the more the probability of a heterogeneity. So obviously the extent of loading of the iodine in the hydrocalcite was also an important consideration. Now, we just to show you that this is our patent. From here you start the claims. You can see we claim. We have in a very structured way given each and every claim of how exactly we are practicing the invention, very, very explicitly. One of the important things, and I believe that this was the turning point and one of the most important claims that we had written down, was that we had clearly indicated that what is the range of iodine which we are incorporating into this iodizing agent, into the hydrocalcite. And we had put the range as 0.5 to 10 because typically we were operating at about 5 to 6% loading. So we thought that we will protect both ends of it. And so that's how we really came up with this 0.5 to 10% number. And lots of other things were very, very explicitly spelled out. Now, when we looked at their patent, as I told you, there was no prior art. In our patent, you'll at least see something like 10 to 12 examples of how we practice the invention. and how we have indicated what are the best means of practicing the invention. They had only one single example. One example. They had described that example. Now, it's possible that they were just trying to hide the actual way that they are doing things from they didn't want to reveal it. Maybe that's what happened, and that's why they wrote this. But the problem is that when you take a patent, and if there is only one example, then that example ought to be quite close to the actual best practice of the invention. You can't give something which is the worst practice and say that yeah, it falls within the range. No, that will not do. It has to be reasonably close to your best mode of practicing the invention. So we just went ahead and saw their description of in the example of how exactly they had prepared this iodizing agent. And my colleagues, Dr. Chunawala, Dr. S.H. Mehta, and Mr. Gandhi, and I think M.V. Sheikh, Munal Sheikh. So they went ahead and made this thing. And I told them that just make it as we have made our own product, and you make theirs as per how they make the product, and also make the product as per how we make the product by whatever process, but keep the broad stoichiometries, etc., similar to what they have used. So, I mean, we tried various combinations. What happened was, when we followed the example of Unilever, and we incorporated the iodine. One was, I think, following our procedure, and the other was following their procedure. But it doesn't matter which procedure we followed. We kept the stoichiometries and all that identical to what they had said. And what happened was, anyway, I'll not tell you right now, but this is how the powder XRD looked for when we practiced their invention. Now, this is how synthetic hydrotalcide normally looks, the powder X-ray diffraction pattern. And that 5 to 6% iodine that we were incorporating, when we incorporated and looked at the powder XRD, it looked like this. So what's the difference between these, between the things on the left and the right? What's the main difference?
The peaks are well defined and there are no intermediate smaller peaks.
In the left. Is
Yes.
that what you're saying?
Yes.
Yeah. So in other words, this was actually a more crystalline material. I mean, obviously they are microcrystals. That's why you do a powder X-ray diffraction. Whereas the peaks had almost disappeared. I mean, they were there, but almost like gone into the background. So this product, we realized, was much more amorphous, this material, these, as compared to what we had made. We had made a relatively more crystalline form of the iodizing agent compared to what these people made. Now, why that was so important was that in their patent, they kept talking about intercalation. We have intercalated the iodate into the synthetic hydrotalcide, and intercalation means that you must have some kind of an ordered structure, and that you are able to intercalate, slip in into the layers between the lattices and put things in. Whereas, when you have got an amorphous substance, it's very difficult to say whether there is intercalation or not, because there is no crystallinity in your system. You can't monitor anything. So what we said is that the entire concept and meaning of intercalation is more or less lost in their product. And so for them to keep talking about intercalation really doesn't make much sense. So that's really what we said. That per se was not really something so critical. It was critical, of course, in some ways. From a very technical argument, it was critical. But from a performance perspective, who cares? They could have said, well, what do we care whether it is amorphous or crystalline if we have made a stable compound? So that's important. I mean, they might say, yeah, you are hung up about crystallinity and that it is amorphous and yours is crystalline, but we don't care. So what I was suspecting was that maybe because there is so much of difference in the nature of the two solids, that maybe the stabilities also will be different of the two iodizing agents. So I then asked my colleagues that can you go and see what is the nature of the stability? And so what we started doing is that we started making the iodizing agent with different percentages of iodine. So this is like ours, 5%. This is like theirs, 15 and 20%. So my colleague started doing a very systematic study, varying the iodine percentage in the solid. And then what we did was we started monitoring the stability of iodine as a function of the loading of iodine in the synthetic hydrotelside. What came loud and clear from this was that the more you incorporate, if you try to put too much of iodine in, like these were their point, 15% and 20%, and this is ours, that 5%. These three, one, two, three. What was very clear was that the extent of iodine loss from our product was relatively lower. Relatively means substantially lower. Like we were getting a loss of about 2%, whereas if we practice the invention as per theirs, and when we did our later on, you'll see that these numbers are not the right numbers. I mean, but it was easily 12%, 6%, etc. So we were sure that our compound is more stable, and we said that is the objective in the first place of making a iodizing agent in synthetic hydrotelside. It is all about stability. Otherwise, why would I do it? I don't want to do it for fun. Why should I put iodine into hydrotelside? In fact, it is also got a nuisance value because, as I told you, you have to mix a solid in a solid, which is much more difficult than spraying a liquid on a solid. I mean, there were certain disadvantages, but this actually told us very clearly that we really did have a point to prove. So that was extremely important. Unilever then told us that no, we don't look at the stability the way you look at. You look at the stability the way we look at it. We said no problem. We'll do it by your method. I think my colleagues asked them that how exactly do you do it? They said, well, we take the solid, we boil it with 100 ml of water for 30 minutes. Okay. After that, we filter, we get the solid, and we look at how much iodine was there in the initial solid and how much iodine there is in the solid after boiling. We said, oh, okay, that's fine. But then what we realized is that this is quite deceptive, because what we realized is that when you boil in water, some of the hydrotelside itself dissolves in the water. So you actually don't get the same amount of hydrotelside as what you started with. You end up getting somewhat less hydrotelside. In that hydrotelside, whatever they were talking about, that 12%, 14%, that's fine. But if we accounted for the loss of the solid in the first place, what we found is that even in the best of scenario, we were getting something like a 22% loss from their compound versus about 5% loss in our case. And so a small difference or what seemed to be a relatively lesser difference got magnified just because of the care with which we carried out a full mass balance. And I hope you can also see that they hadn't done that. They just filtered, took the solid, estimated the iodine in the solid. They didn't see that whether they ended up getting the same amount of iodizing agent as they started with. So it was now quite amplified, the the difference in the stabilities of the two compounds. The other was that, as I told you, we also looked at their process, and when we followed it, how much of iodine was actually getting taken up from the solution. What we found is that barely 50% of the iodine as potassium iodate which they took in water is getting incorporated, and 50% is remaining. When we asked them that what are you going to do with this solution, they had no answer. Later on we came to know that they had abandoned this process, and I think that one of the things is they probably could not solve that problem that easily, that how they'll exactly recover that iodine and recycle it, whatever was not being taken up. Later on, of course, we found a much more elegant solution, which would have worked for both them as well as us. Now, in our case, because our iodine uptake was low, about 5%, we did not need to dump a lot of potassium iodate into water for the iodate to get taken up in the hydrotalcite. And we could prove that we can incorporate up to about 98% of the iodate that we started with. Number of examples, not one, two, several examples where we showed that how it gets taken up. So whichever way you looked at it, we had an advantage. We were taking up more iodate, so there would be very little loss of iodate in the water, assuming that there is no clear-cut way of recovering the iodate. The second is that we proved that the stability is better and that it had a correlation with the powder XRD pattern, probably because it was amorphous, that their stability was lower. Maybe there was more surface incorporation rather than intercalation in their case. The other that we also proved is, you see, we realized that if they have got something like 15 to 20% iodine in their solid, and we have got 5%, and normally you have to put in something like 15 to 30 ppm of iodine into salt. So they will be requiring much less of the solid than we will. And so what we realized is that when we start doing mixing of the iodizing agent into the solid, that in our case, the uniformity of mixing was certainly better. Now, I must also tell you this, that at no stage during this entire battle did Unilever ever challenge a single data of ours, which means that they must have been also doing what we were doing and convincing themselves that yes, what we are saying is right. Because if we had said, for example, that no, your stability is 20% of your iodine is getting lost, and if we were bluffing or if we had done a shoddy experiment, they would have pointed it out. They would have said, who told you? You don't know how to do experiments. But they never challenge. And also, it's a tribute to my colleague, the kind of quality of their work. They did a really thorough job. So basically, all that we set out to prove, we ended up proving that we had a more uniform mixing, we had a more greater stability of the iodine, and the incorporation of iodine from the solution was much better. So, we were overall quite happy with what we had done. By the way, all things that I'm telling you happened over several years. It's not things that happened just in a few months. So this was dragging on for quite some time. And then finally, we were called for a hearing, both us and Hindustan Lever. Both of us were called by the Deputy Controller of Patents in Delhi. And, he gave an opportunity to both sides to defend their case, especially us, because we were defending, because we are the ones who were infringing on the Hindustan Lever patent. I would say to some extent, well, after the hearing, that person who was the deputy controller, he said it's one of the best hearings that he had been involved in, and he was very satisfied with all the arguments that were made, etc. And we felt that we have done a reasonably good job. But what was probably a fundamental mistake that we made was that we were also quite defensive about the fact that we did not see their patent. And so we kept saying, this is not there. The US patent, the examination report has come. Nowhere have they pointed out any of this. So it was certainly not in the public domain. Even the US patent attorneys agree with that. So they heard all that, but they said, no, that is not an argument. Hindustan Lever will still have priority. That argument was not something that perhaps we should have emphasized on. But the rest of the things that we had definitely certain advantages in our patent application compared to Hindustan Lever, that I think generally was agreed. So we thought that we stood a good chance of winning this case. But then when this happened, what happened was that finally when the verdict came out, we lost the case. The controller said that no, Hindustan Lever's patent will stand, and the CSIR patent is negated. It was very dismal for a while for us. But then what really irked us, and we were very angry about it, was that the controller of patents almost used the same language as the patent person of Hindustan Lever. It's almost like he had copied everything that they said. And we said, what is this? I mean, this is not a fair hearing. They're just repeating the same things over and over again. So we were frustrated, but because we saw it as such a one-sided verdict, especially after all the technical arguments that we had made, we said that no, we must continue to fight. I must say that CSIR, the head of patent in CSIR, was extremely supportive, and he said, no, Dr. Gold, it doesn't matter how much money it costs, we will fight it out. Now, just like, when you lose a case in the High Court, you can go to the Supreme Court. So even patents, what they have is an intellectual property appellate board. So it's like the Supreme Court of patents. It's actually headed by one of the retired chief justices of the Supreme Court. So it's a very high power body. And so we said that no, we must appeal to the Intellectual Property Appellate Board, IPAB. So then we had to again get back to work. That what are we going to tell this appellate board? What is it that we have not stated already? Because if you only state what we have stated already, then of course we might still win it. But we felt that we have to make some additional points. So at that time, myself and this head of the CSIR's patent office, we sat and spent a long time just kind of strategizing that how we're going to defend our case. So I realized that, as I told you, that one of the fundamental flaws was that we were always trying to justify that we had not seen this, and that was not a sufficient reason. So what we did was that from a defensive strategy, we went to an offensive strategy. So, and I'll show you in the next few slides that what exactly was the offensive strategy. So we were always, as I told you till that time, saying, look, our claims, our patent is like this, everything. Okay, that's all fine. What we said is that let us look at the Hindustan Lever patent and let us see what are the, because what are really the things that are not so good about this patent, and can we attack them on their patent rather than defending our patent. So that was really the change in strategy that we adopted. So what we did was that we wrote down each of their claims. So these were their claims. This is now the Hindustan Lever patent. Okay, we started writing down each of their claims and tried to say something about what we think is not correct about it. So the first thing was that they talked about basically treating their hydrotalcite with I mean either with a mineral acid. They did not provide a single example of where they treated it with a mineral acid to incorporate the iodate. And the other was they talked about calcining the layered double hydroxides. What we said is, this is not your idea, calcining the layered double hydroxide. This has been taught by Linda Parker in 1995, well before you filed your application. So why did you not cite this as the prior art? And you have made your patent look much more original than it really is. So you can see what we wrote. Calcining layered double hydroxide at a temperature range of 300 to 700 degrees centigrade falls within known prior art. See, for example, Parker et al., Industrial Engineering Chemistry, this, that, which deals specifically with calcination of carbonate exchange layered double hydroxide for incorporation of anions. Sadly, the inventors have failed to cite relevant prior art in their patent. It may further be noted that not a single example of treating with mineral acid or treating with mineral acid and calcining is provided in the patent. So we said, on what basis are you claiming this without citing it? This is not your invention. So that was one, which we thought that it really now attacks Hindustan Lever quite badly. The second was, you see, somebody must have told Hindustan Lever, what you do is you say that you are taking potassium iodate or iodizing agent from almost like 0% to 400%. So they wrote a claim essentially mixing the treated layered double hydroxide of step 1 at least once with solution of a food component such that the ratio of the food component said treated layered double hydroxide of step 3 is 3 to 450%. What we said is percent of what? I said, is it volume percent of weight by volume, weight by weight? What percent are you talking about? So what we wrote is that note that this refers to ratios of proportions of the reactants, and also what they took has got nothing to do with what is there in the final product. We said, which is your claim which says that what is there in your product? How much of it do you have? We have said that we have between 0.5 and 10%. In which patent claim have you said that how much of iodine are you incorporating? We said this is only talking about some reactants, and we wrote that note that this refers to ratios of proportions of the reactants and has nothing to do with proportions in the product. Further, 3 to 450% means nothing without it being qualified, whether it is a weight percent or mole percent or some other percent. Percent of what? So the claim should be invalidated due to lack of clarity. So we went on like this and started basically demolishing all of their claims. And most importantly, we said that you have not cited prior art, and you have not defined what is your product. I said, it is like, if you say, this is my process to make a drug, but I don't say what is the drug. I said, what does that process mean? I don't even know what is the drug. So I said, without knowing, how much you're trying to incorporate, what does this process mean? That's how we went about demolishing their patent. And then, as I said, we very clearly again said that in the CSIR patent, claims were written with utmost clarity and without any ambiguity. All prior art had been duly cited, except HLL's patent, which we were unaware of. That's a fact. Even the US Patent Office confirmed that no, there was no such prior art which they had access to. Moreover, the prior art of Linda Parker had no reference to the effect of. Now, what was interesting was, you see, that now there was a third prior art. It was not just Hindustan Lever. We had Linda Parker's prior art, and both of us fell within that. The question was that in view of Linda Parker's prior art, will both of our patents get cancelled? Because she has already said how to incorporate anions. How much intelligence does it take after that to basically incorporate an anion? Once she has taught that you can heat this and then incorporate anions and impart stability. But nowhere has Linda Parker mentioned in her paper anything about the relationship between stability of a compound or stability of the anion and the extent of loading. So all the hard work that we had done, where we showed this effect of loading, we came in very, very handy, because even Linda Parker had not stated anywhere any relationship between stability and loading. So we said that clears us not only of Hindustan Lever's patent, but also of Linda Parker's prior art, because we are talking about something different. We are talking about stability, and that's what matters. And then we went about very, very systematically reiterating in a slightly different way what are all the most critical points. So we put 6 points. Most relevant prior art have not been cited in the Hindustan Lever patent. Claims have been made without supporting examples, especially claims pertaining to acid treatment and use of iodide as iodizing agent, not a single example. Ratios of reagents are indicated in several claims which lack clarity. It is unclear which is the claim that deals with the iodine iodate loading in lead double hydroxide along with the desired range of loading. That's your product. I said, did you define your product? What are you talking about process without defining the product? 5. Since there is only a single example in this patent, it must be taken as the best mode of practice of the invention. The following are concluded from this supposedly best mode of practice. 1. Incorporation of barely 50% of the iodate taken in solution. In our case, it was 97%. In their case, it's 50%. Repeat experiments by CSIR show that as much as 31% of the iodate incorporated in the matrix leaches out into the filtrate after performing boiling water test. Nowhere did anyone disprove us, or contend any of this data. Third, it is important to mention in the context of 5.2 that the product as obtained through the process of example 1 is highly amorphous, and therefore all this claim of intercalation does not hold water. 6. HLL indicated during the hearing that the process has been discontinued and solution iodization resorted to, again as in the past. The above would suggest that the patent is devoid of utility. And the reason is, you see that to get a patent, there are 3 criteria that you have to meet. One is that it has to have novelty, which clearly Unilever had. Second, there must be an inventive step. There certainly was an inventive step in the fact that they incorporated it into synthetic hydrotalcide. Linda Parker had done no work with iodine. So, to that extent, I think Unilever were quite original in what they did. But the third is that it must have industrial utility. We again asked them, you tell us why you have withdrawn from this process. And we said, we know because you don't get what you are claiming. You don't get a stable iodizing agent as you are claiming. And you don't know what to do with the rest of that 50% of iodate which is left in your solution after you have incorporated iodate. So we said these are the things, and based on this patent should be thrown out. So I hope you can see that how we went from a defensive strategy to an offensive strategy. Again, I mean, I'm not going to read through all of this, but it has to be put in a very structured way. Our patent, their patent, point by point by point, all of the other points that we didn't make over here, we took advantage of and made the points here. These are mostly lesser points. There were nothing so important in these points. The previous points were the most important. Also, the actual lawyer whom CSIR hired to defend the case before the Intellectual Property Appellate Board did a very good job. I think he understood the issues that we had mentioned, so he could defend his case. Now, it's also very interesting that Hindustan Lever, who till that point had fought a lot with us, I think maybe they sensed that they might lose the case in the Intellectual Property Appellate Board. Because all of the things that we are writing, it also goes to them. So they have a chance to respond to it. But they wrote a letter saying that they are not going to attend the hearing. And they said that, a third-class patent, I am not saying exactly that's the language, but almost amounts to that, like what CSIR had taken should in any case be thrown out. So that's what they wrote. Okay, I mean, none of us thought that our patent was third class, for sure. I think the Intellectual Property Board, Appellate Board, agreed with us, and they overturned the decision of the Patent Office. And not only that, they were extremely harsh on the Patent Office. They said that your judgment has been awful. There has been no application of mine in the judgment that you have given. It does not say anything about the points that have been made by CSIR, and so they overturned the decision of the Patent Office. And not only that, they ordered the Patent Office to grant us our patent within 30 days. It's interesting because you see what happened was that we had already lost more than 10 years of the patent life, because we had filed the patent application in 2004. It was already 2015 when this judgment came. So 11 years had gone by. There were so many people who wanted to license our technology. And I told all of them, no, we cannot license technology because this particular patent is under litigation. And unless the litigation is clear, if we, for example, lose the judgment, then there's no question of licensing technology to you. It would be ethically wrong. Of course, a lot of people would have probably lost interest because it dragged on for so long, something like 6-7 years, this case. But it's interesting, that they wrote to me from CSIR that the term of patent is 20 years up till now, 10 years has been passed. So you have another 10 years to commercialize it, Of course, because I retired by then, it's not my property in any case. It's the property of CSIR. But I hope you've got a sense of the kind of rigor that is required to be able to defend a case in case you are ever sued for infringement. You can imagine if you have things like pharmaceutical drugs, etc., then of course the stakes become very high. Sometimes people lose cases and they have to pay millions of dollars in penalty. So it was very, very important for us. But the reason why I'm pointing it out is that you have to ask yourself, if you ever patent, ask yourself, why are you patenting it? Is there a reason? Like, for example, I realize that most academic institutions and even CSIR, we are very poor at policing patents. So there are so many people who might be copying all of our work, which we are doing. We don't know who is going and finding out who is copying and who is not. And conversely, if you are patenting something and you get sued, imagine the headache unless you are absolutely sure about what you're doing and what are the implications if you get sued for infringement. Be very, very careful. Don't just jump into filing a patent. Majority of the people I find, the patents are in any case not worth much. So nobody actually cares whether you have patented it or not, because nobody is actually going to practice it. And all it does is it probably helps to improve your biodata. And you say, I've taken so many patents, etc. But other than that, of being of academic interest, it has no value. So please keep that in mind. This is something that we have to always ask ourselves. Just like you saw Takeda, they lost much more than what they gained by patenting. What did they gain? Nothing, except for giving things to DuPont on a platter. So please keep this in mind. Now, let me also tell you that it is not just because of this particular patent that I was so determined that we must fight it out. There were a few other things that we had done, and all of that would have got undone if we had lost the case. Let me show you what it was. I told you that when you take a potassium iodate solution and you contact it with the calcined synthetic hydrocalcite, that the iodate gets taken up. In our case, of course, it gets taken up as much as 97%. And in the case of Hindustan Liver, maybe about 50%. Now, the question is, what remains in the solution? Is it just potassium iodate? And I realized that it can't be, because if I have got carbonate as my exchangeable anion, and when I'm calcining, carbon dioxide is coming out as CO2, then I have got an O2 minus charge left in my synthetic hydrocalcite after calcining. And if I am putting in iodate, each iodate has one negative charge, then it must be that two iodates get in, and that O2 minus basically gets exchanged out as what? O2 minus plus water will give you two hydroxyl ion groups. So what we realized is that actually when you calcine and contact it with potassium iodate, what gets released into solution is potassium hydroxide. So it's not going to be easy to recycle or reuse that potassium iodate, even if you put in more potassium iodate. The reason is because now the hydroxyl ions will start competing with the iodate ions for intercalation. And so you may not actually get a very good intercalation of iodate if there is so much of alkali left over in the solution. But at that point, we went back to our original invention where I told you that we took iodine, and you can just add iodine into alkali and converts it into iodide and iodate. So what we did was that we said, oh, great. So there is a small amount of potassium iodate which is left in my solution. I've got all the KOH which has got released, the hydroxyl ion from the synthetic hydrocalcide and the potassium counterion from my potassium iodate. So it's got potassium hydroxide. And we said, so why don't we just add iodine into this? And what will it do? It will just split it up into 5 Ki and 1 KiO3. That's the standard school chemistry that all of you have learned. Then the question was that is there any way that we can convert the iodide into iodate? We have consumed up all the KOH, but now I've got iodide, and we want to convert that iodide into iodate without creating any other anion. We don't want there any other anion which can compete with the intercalation of the iodate. There was a very brilliant electrochemist who was working with us, Dr. Ramachandra, and I knew that if I leave Ramachandra with a problem, he'll solve it. And I told Ramachandra, can you see if we can figure out a way of converting iodide to iodate without generating any counterion? Like, for example, you see, what I mean is, I can add bleaching powder to it. I can add hypochlorite, and I'll get iodate, but then I'll be left with chloride, which can compete with iodate. So we didn't want that kind of a situation. We just wanted pure potassium iodate. And Ramachandra worked out this very nice electrolytic scheme where he has an anion exchange membrane in the middle. And so what he said is that at the anode, what I'll do is that this iodide will get oxidized to iodate. I'll do that oxidation. This is the stoichiometry of that reaction. 5 Ki plus 30 hydroxyl ion will give me 5 KiO3 plus 15 water plus 30 electrons. And then what he said is, look, the electrons are going to go to the cathode, and in the cathode, the reduction reaction that we will carry out, and he succeeded in doing that, was basically this. The 30 electrons are picked up by protons from the water, and it basically gets converted into hydrogen. And I generate 30 hydroxyl ions, and because it's an anion exchange membrane, and I'm creating a concentration gradient over here, that the hydroxyl ions are getting consumed in the anode, and hydroxyl ions are getting generated in the cathode. So the hydroxyl ion will migrate from the cathode compartment to the anode, and effectively I maintain a continuity of my hydroxide. So that's effectively the scheme that he worked out. This is actually his prototype cell which he made. It was a brilliant piece of work which he did, and we got this patent granted. Our entire process of incorporating then potassium iodate into the synthetic hydrotalcide, it became a ZLD process, zero liquid discharge. There's no effluent. I just keep cycling this over and over again using this electrolytic process. But then I said, what's the use of this? Because if Unilever in any case wins the case and it can actually make the SHT iodate and we lose the rights to it, then this is of no interest to me anymore. What will I do with it? So that was another thing that egged us on. We said, look, it is not just one patent at stake. There is more than one thing at stake. This is one. Second was another very important thing that had happened after our development of the synthetic hydrotalcide iodate. There is another very important salt which is known as double fortified salt. I don't know if you all know, but in our country especially, many of the young girls, teenagers, or even younger, they suffer from anemia. Lots and lots of girls in our country have problem of anemia. Of course, the lots of work has gone on all over the world, supported by UNICEF, in trying to make a very good salt which has both. It has iron in it and it has got iodine in it. And that is known as double fortified salt. That kind of salt exists. But the problem is that when we looked at that salt for many years, we realized that that salt, it turns brown in color. Basically, you know that ferric compounds typically tend to be brownish in color. And so, whereas ferrous sulfate is greenish, very pale green. ferric is dark brown. And that's probably the reason why it turns brown. And so we knew that none of the people anywhere in the world had come up with a satisfactory solution to this particular problem. So what Chunawala, who was one of the architects of the work on the synthetic hydrochalcite with iodine, Chunawala thought of something extremely clever. I don't know what made him think about it. What he said is, look, what is the normal hydrochalcite? It is basically, as I told you, magnesium hydroxide with some magnesiums replaced with aluminium. And aluminium is, what is the oxidation state of aluminium? It's Al plus 3. So Chunawala said, is there any way, instead of using aluminium ion, can I use ferric ion and try to incorporate it into the lattice of synthetic hydrochalcite? In other words, he wanted to make a variant of synthetic hydrochalcite which had iron in it instead of aluminium. And not only did he succeed in doing this, almost miraculously, and I honestly don't know what is the reason, although we have done a lot of work subsequently on it, that compound is absolutely white in color. It's so beautiful, and yet it has got something like 15% iron. You cannot imagine, you go and look for a ferric compound which is white, you'll not find any. And yet Chunawala had succeeded in making that. Once he did, and he could keep it out in the open for months together, and it just stays beautifully white. And I told Chunawala that, let's do one thing, we will now incorporate our original potassium, the iodate synthetic hydrochalcite, along with this hydrochalcite made from iron, Fe3. And because both are independent solids, there's no possibility of them getting mixed together and reacting. So we said our salt should be very stable. Sure enough, we could make a double fortified salt, which is absolutely white in color. And lots of tests have been done on this salt. Okay, and it has been found to be as bioavailable as any of the iron compounds. You can see the iron levels in the blood, and this was done by this person in the medical college in Bhavnagar. What happened was that this also was solved, but again we had the problem that if we did not win that case, then we would not be able to make the double fortified salt by this method. We might be able to make single fortified salt. Of course, we'll be able to sell iron fortified salt, but that's not what our intention was. Our intention was double fortified salt. Winning that case enabled all of these patents now to be practicable. Nobody can prevent us from now practicing these inventions. So that is how critical it was. In fact, let me tell you that it took, there's a friend of mine, he's just about to retire from the University of Alabama, probably one of the foremost experts in the world on magnetism. And when I told him about this work, and I said, I'm just trying to figure out what makes this compound white. And the first thing we had to do was to figure out, is it ferrous or ferric? What is the oxidation state in which the iron exists? He, of course, with all the capability that he had, we were able to show that this compound has magnetism. So it is not a diamagnetic ion, it's paramagnetic. The second thing is he also did very high resolution photoelectron spectroscopy. I think he was able to conclude that indeed it does look like it is in the ferric state. So now, in fact, what we are trying to find out is why does the electronic transition come at the place where it does, and why don't you get a visible transition, and why does it shift probably towards the infrared or ultraviolet, which we have to figure out which way it is shifting. I hope you can also see that how you can tie up very good science, whether it is the BRC work on radioactive iodine, or this kind of work that you can actually link up your technologies very well with underpinning knowledge. Just like the TRIZ methodology, which drives innovation through identification of contradictions, I ask myself, what actually drove our invention? Like, for example, iodized salt. What drove it? And is there only one driver, or are there multiple drivers? And so, what I did was write down some of the drivers of innovation which I thought were important to us. Every town should be able to make their own iodized salt. Many times, if you are self critical, that actually is a big driver of innovation. Like necessity is the mother of invention. The urgency in our case was that the Salt Commissioner's office wrote me a letter. The Salt Commissioner wrote me a letter saying that please do something about the fact that we don't make a gram of iodine in our country. Improving the product attribute. What is it that we were trying to do? We were trying to make a iodized salt existed, potassium iodate is used. I can always say, yeah, it's all used. But I can say, no, it's not stable enough. What next was another thing that always drove us. So whenever we had an invention, we asked, yeah, but now what? So we made the iodized salt with synthetic hydrotalcite, and Chunawala and Mr. Gandhi and S.H. Mehta said, why don't we try and incorporate iron into this same matrix, substituting aluminium with iron? It was out of this what next that it came. Process simplification. Just add crystals of iodine into alkali, it forms iodide iodate, spray that on and control the pH within 7 and 8. You're through, you're okay. Looping, this constant thought that I must make things zero effluent, that potassium iodate solution has got some alkali, and if you can put iodine into that, you can make iodide and iodate, and if you can oxidize the iodide back into iodate, that I'll have a ZLD process. It all came from this idea of looping. Inspiration from prior art, yes. People, they went and looked at the literature. They found this paper by Linda Parker. That was the basis of the work that we did on iodized salt. You can also see what happens if you don't acknowledge the prior art. Moving knowledge across boundaries. We were working on bromine. And the thought that we can apply the same knowledge to iodine and make an iodizing agent, the iodide iodate agent. It's as simple as just transferring a knowledge from one domain to another. We had all the capability of making ion exchange membrane, and that Ramachandra was able to apply that and create the ZLD process, taking advantage of his anion exchange membrane.